all walk together as one. This revolution is about restoring our democracy. And this revolution is about stopping this creeping dictatorship.
My friends, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, political leader of the United National Congress and the best Prime Minister Trinidad and Tobago ever had. We are at the UNC headquarters at M. Rampersad building, and let me take that moment to acknowledge the St. Augustine team who made their way down to San Fernando for their continuous support tonight. My friends, coming after my brother Victor Roberts, who has been a champion and a voice on the ground, I want to tell you that there is power in the voice of people. My friends, the role of a government is to provide, either on its own or in partnership with other entities and organizations, public infrastructure such as transportation systems, communication networks, sewage, water, roads, bridges, and waterways. That is one of the roles of a government. Disaster response is so important in governance and in running a country that in many countries, Trinidad and Tobago included, the organization for responding to that disaster falls under the ministry responsible for national security. While the murder rate is going up, the rest of the ministry is also collapsing. And so we have disaster management falling apart. And we have the man responsible for the prevention of massive flooding, major landslips, and preventable disasters, Rohan Sinanan. What do we hear from the man responsible for the upkeep of our major infrastructure in Trinidad and Tobago? You know what he says? It is normal. Those areas have a low gradient. That is expected. Floods are happening all over the world. There is an attempt by the Minister of Works and Transport, Rohan Sinanan, to try to get citizens to accept the massive flooding we are seeing as something acceptable and a normal occurrence. He is so desperate to cover up his neglect of the infrastructure in this country, of the water courses that he has failed as a minister. My friends, as I speak to you tonight, residents of St. Augustine constituency are once again marooned in their homes. You may have seen on the news Valsayn South, Spring Village, Trantrail Road, all of these areas. But I remember our brother Rohan Sinanan, and I'm only saying brother because he's a fellow parliamentarian and I want to be respectful tonight. I remember Rohan Sinanan declaring that flooding will be a thing of the past. All you remember that? Every year since that promise, millions of dollars have been allocated for drainage and clearing rivers and maintenance of infrastructure such as floodgates and so on. And you know what happens? Every year, millions go back unspent from the Ministry of Works, money allocated to prevent flooding. So it is not a matter of lack of funding. It is a matter of total incompetence by Minister Rohan Sinanan. And yes, over the last 7 years, I have spoken about the PNM's deliberate starving of the local government for resources to undertake maintenance work, drainage work, and so on. And that is part of the reason why everywhere in this country is flooding now. But I will leave Mr. Pocket Square for another night. He is as clueless as ever. He has done nothing for us to really respond to, and he continues with his pappy show when it comes to local government. But I will deal with him another night. We still have many areas where Caroni 1975 Limited used to operate, where Petrotrin used to function, where many of those water courses are now abandoned. And I also recall that in the 2019 local government election campaign, the PNM made a promise to us. They promised that there will be a national drainage plan funded by the Development Bank of Latin America. And they made a big announcement. Whatever happened to that? Do you just jump on a platform when it is an election and make promises and then they never materialize? That is PNM we are facing now. So Rohan Sinanan continues to trivialize the severity of flooding, and he is also blaming citizens. So the gradient of the land and all these things. But he is ignoring the fact that the flooding is now occurring throughout Trinidad and Tobago. You have areas in Cocorite, Maraval, right now as we speak in Cocorite there, in Arima, in Sandy Grande, they had 4 feet of water. In Kunupia, Shoguanas, Pinal, Oropuch, Valsain South, as much as 5 feet of water reaching to the top of the street sign. You will not believe it. But the neglect of the minister and the refusal to take action is making the situation worse. We have floodgates that have not been repaired, leaking, pouring gallons of water into the community. And all it requires is for the Minister of Works and Transport to repair the floodgates. All it requires is for the Minister of Works and Transport to fix the embankments. In Bamboo Settlement, in Woodland, in Caroni, in St. Helena, all of these areas continuously flooded, and these things are preventable. I know because when the United National Congress was in government, we did so much work and reduced flooding throughout Trinidad and Tobago, whether it was UNC or PNM constituencies. So having spent millions of taxpayers' dollars, Minister Rohan Sinanan continues to preside over the worst state of neglect of infrastructure and drainage. Citizens have lost their lives. There are people who have died in flooding. Tonight, I want to make special mention of the situation in Valsain South, where people are marooned in their homes. And this has been happening every year. And there is a simple engineering solution that has been submitted to the government, that has been submitted to those in authority, and there has been no action. This past 4 days is probably the longest period that those residents have been marooned, unable to come out of their homes, to access health care, to go to school, to go to work. And all it requires is a floodgate where the Wayabal River comes into the community, and that Wayabal River flows into the Caroni River. And all it requires is one floodgate. You tell me Rohan Sinanan, with the millions of dollars at his disposal, can't install one floodgate in this country? An engineering plan was designed and submitted with a flood dam and a pump to be installed in a similar fashion as what they have in Bamboo 2 and Bamboo 3. And I want to mention, when you see flood in Bamboo 2 and Bamboo 3, again, it is because of the neglect of the government. Why is the floodgate in Bamboo leaking for so many years and you refuse to repair it? Why is it that the pump, which you know does not have the capacity to take the water out, is still there? And every time there's a flood, you have to bring in a temporary pump. I want to ask Rohan Sinanan, who is getting the contract for this temporary pump you bring every time? And not every time the pump comes, it works, but they have to get paid. So I want to tell you, Rohan Sinanan, this flooding is not an act of God. This is an act of incompetence on your behalf. This is an emergency situation, and we need a project done in this area to prevent lives from being lost, to prevent health hazards. When the people in Trantrail Road and Dookie Singh and Benny Lane are marooned in their homes, the health hazard that they face is tremendous. And I want to ask if it is that the minister is refusing to service these areas because they are UNC-held constituencies. I will not stand for the constituents of St. Augustine being victimized because of who they voted for. I don't care whether you want to come in your PNM jersey. If you want to come and campaign, come and fix the problem because they are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. As a member of Parliament for St. Augustine, I have been lobbying on behalf of residents in and out of Parliament to have these situations fixed. And I want to tell you that during the last budget debate, I made specific mention of the floodgates and the embankment and so on in these areas. And the minister promised to visit. I am still awaiting his visit, and I am holding him to account for his promise. But something else came to my attention. When countries are affected by natural disasters, there are funds in place, international funding in place for recovery from disaster. The government, it was reported on yesterday's newspaper, Trinidad Express, that this government has received a total of US $5.84 million. That is 39.4 million TT dollars that they have received from the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility following the heavy rainfall that occurred in Trinidad and Tobago earlier this month. So while budget was going on, I was in and out of Parliament because during that time, we had a lot of widespread flooding and a lot of damage and so on. I remember there was a lady, Miss Teresa Lynch, who was swept away by floods in La Pastora in Lopino, another life lost. Can we please, in honor of her life, ensure that these things do not happen again? The Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government, my partner Faris, they told us that there were 75 incidents of flooding. You believe that? 75 incidents in the whole country. So that is to tell you how out of touch they are with reality. But I come back to the power of people. And in this democracy, Trinidad and Tobago, I want to take this opportunity to thank those people from the media who have been covering the marooned residents in Valsayn South and St. Augustine South, and the Valsayn Residents Association, who have also been outspoken. When Victor Roberts and them burn tires, when they speak out and they march from Point Fortin to Port of Spain, I want to tell you there is power in the voice of people. And we, as citizens, must all take a stand. We must stand for our country, we must stand for our children, and we must stand against PNM incompetence and neglect. Thank you.